everyone, I am 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 and welcome to 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 Fundai Clear. In this video, I'll start the next and the last section of class 11th history, that is the section 4th, Paths to Modernization, in which there are three themes, the theme 9, the 10th and the 11th one of class 11th history. So in the last theme, in the last section, what did we talk about? It was all about the feudalism, the concept of Renaissance and the encounters between the people of America and that of Europe. We had seen that in the medieval era and in the early modern era, what was going on in the world history? It was that a path to modernization was created. Something like that was happening, that was leading towards modernization. In this section, there are two things which we will discuss that are very important for the world history and for what we call as modernization. Those two things are the Industrial Revolution and a series of political revolution that started from the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So many of you know already about the French Revolution. We will also see that in this section there are three themes. First one is about Britain. It's all about industrialization. How did that occur and why it was that Britain was the first country to have to become industrial nation. And it is said that in the earlier times it was industrial revolution that it was being spread, but later historians began to question that. It was simply that they were following the patterns but not reproducing any model of industrial revolution in Britain. For example, in Britain, what happened that in the first phase of industrial revolution or industrialization, the cotton industries and the textile industries were first to have this experience. Then in the second phase, they had an impact or experience in the heavy emerging industries such as the iron or the coal industry. Just opposite to that, in Russia or in any other country, they were in the first phase of industrialization, they had an experience or change in the heavy emerging industries, and in the second phase they had textile or cotton or wool, whatever it was. So you could say that it was simply following the pattern but not exactly reproducing any model from the you could say that reproduce, not just following that what happened in Britain. So you could say that the theme 9 is all about the industrial revolution and the industrialization that we will also discuss in this chapter. Then we get to the political series, or you could say political revolutions in different countries. You know, Japan, that had a defeat in the Second World War, but how did it become a developed nation now? How has it emerged so much? Just take an example of China that had a lot of colonial exploitation, and that was not direct. You know what, that for India or any other country or many other countries, there are that direct colonial exploitation by different colonial power, but China was a country that seemed to be a semi-colony. What happened that countries such as Russia, America and Britain, Germany started to interfere in the political matters of China without even conquering it. So it became something like a semi-colony. But how did it become a one-party country and has developed so much? We will see that as well in this section in the theme 11 of it. So basically in this section what we are going to talk about is all about the paths to modernization. How did the world change from ancient, from medieval to the modern world? We will see that in this section, and particularly in this video we will discuss the theme 9 of class 11th history, or maybe the first theme of this section, that is the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution, now you can have a pretty good idea about what this chapter is talking about. In this chapter, we will see that how from 1750s to 1800s, there were so many industries going on. There was so much like industrialization. The term industrialization occurred in Britain. Britain was the first nation or industrial nation to have industrialization in it. You know what, that Britain had an impact, or you could say that had gone through the first revolution, first industrial revolution. Basically it is called as first industrial revolution because after 1800 it was more focused on chemical reactions or maybe something like science reactions, in which Britain fell off. It was countries such as Germany and the USA that took over. But in this chapter we will not discuss on that, but we'll see about the first industrial revolution that happened in Britain first, and then it spread all over the world. So basically we will be seeing that how the spinning and the weaving of cloth like cotton began, how there was a transformation in the coal, iron and steel industries. We will see that in this chapter, the financial reasons, the economic reasons, as it has a tremendous impact, a tremendous economic growth in Britain. On contrary, it also had, in the initial phase, it had some impacts, very bad impacts, changes in the lives of the workers, including women and children, that we'll see in this chapter, and how the laws were made to protect them after such a long period of time, after protests and movements. We'll see that in this chapter. So basically we'll discuss everything related to the Industrial Revolution in this chapter, that is totally focused on the Britain one. Now, you know what is the first people to use the term Industrial Revolution were the scholars, Friedrich Engels in Germany and Michelet, George Michelet in France. These two were the first ones to use this term. In English, it was first used by an economist and a philosopher, that is Arnold Toynbee. Now, this person, you could say that was in parallel with the reign of George III, on which he was giving his lectures at universities, in different universities, even at Oxford University. In 1884, those were published after his untimely death, and later historians such as, many historians like Aston, and then we have John Hashburn, they believed that Toynbee was right. There was indeed a very good economic growth in Britain economy during that time in the 18th century. From 1750 to 1800, there was tremendous impact of Industrial Revolution, industrialization in Britain. So we will see that all in this chapter. So without any further ado, let's get started with the first topic, that is why Britain. Now, why Britain? First of all, the question that might rise in your minds is that why are we all talking about Britain? Why is it that Britain was the first country to have the suffering and experience of the Industrial Revolution? Why was not any other country? Well, there was a reason behind it as well. You know what, that by as early as 17th century, Britain had no political matters or conflicts going on, because Britain had become as a United Kingdom. It had unified Scotland, Wales and England into one after an agreement which we have already talked about in the previous classes. So in 17th century, Britain was the United Kingdom or the Great Britain. It was after the agreement that it was named as the Great Britain. And you know what, that after that there was only one money, one market, one money, not but one currency that was going on, one laws, particular uniform laws in all these regions. So combining these three countries, it became as just one country, so that market was also one. It was not shattered into pieces. Earlier what used to happen is that for example, Wales is another and Scotland is another country. Then what would happen, that if a purchaser or a buyer, a trader is going from these places, then those local authorities will levy taxes on him. So because of taxes, what will he do? He will just rise the prices of those commodities. So that is why these were unified under one country, under one currency, under one laws, under one market that was not fragmented by the local authorities, levying taxes, and many other things were being common now. So you could say that is why it had political stability that was not seen anywhere else during that time. And as we have already seen that, during that time there was French Revolution going on, there were many other things going on, but Britain had been stable, quite a stable country it was. It had political stability, and that is why it was the first reason. Then what happened was that money was used as an exchange medium. Now the workers got their wages and salaries in form of money instead, that in earlier times instead it was given in form of commodities or any item, maybe food or something else, but now it was given in the form of money as the wages and salaries of those workers. So it was used more and more by the workers or many people to exchange, to buy and to sell. That is why money became very important in Britain. And what happened that in Britain there was a kind of agricultural revolution that happened, in which the big landlords, what they did was that they bought all the land adjacent to their land that was of small farmers or of small peasants. After buying them, what would happen? Those small farmers, laborers or peasants would not have any land to work on, and that is why they were going towards towns for work, for searching for work, to do any work for earning their livelihood. So that is why agricultural revolution, and due to political stability, that was the most important point, Britain was the first industrial nation. So you could put it like that. Now the next topic here is towns, trade and finance. So towns, trade and finance. Now what happened? Between 1750 to 1800, around just not 19, let's not talk about it, but in Europe there were many cities that were growing up. The towns that were growing up in area and in population, they were growing larger and larger day by day. Out of 19 European cities that went through this change at a very large scale, 11 were just in Britain, and of them London was the largest one, was the biggest one. What happened is London now had become a global significant country by then. Earlier, the trade was being done in the Mediterranean ports of Italy and France, but now it had shifted from there to the ports of Holland and England, the Atlantic ports of Holland and England. So that is why London was having more and more significance and exposure. Even that it replaced Amsterdam, which was providing an international loan to all of the countries. It replaced it. All of the Asian companies, big companies, African companies had their offices in London. So in short terms, London had a global significance. It had replaced many of the other cities and many of the other areas, and due to which what would happen? Britain would gain more and more success and economic growth at the same time. This was particularly because all those people from the villages were coming to the towns. If these regions had their population, you could say expansion, then it was only because there were immigration. There were so many immigrants. So not due to the biological reproduction, but it was due to the immigrants that the population was increasing day by day. That was the first reason. Now what happened that in Britain, the most you could say trading thing was that it was providing network with rivers. That trade was being continued as early as 1724. There were around rivers, you could say riverways that were providing around 1,160 miles for trade purpose, for trade routes, because it was easier, faster and cheaper than traveling by land. At that time there were no railways, so except that these waterways had a cheaper and faster feature than by land. That is why it was preferred more and more. Except the mountainous areas, all the regions of Britain under 15 miles were connected by the rivers. So you could say that trade was being continued like that. That is why it provided a network for the triangular trade between the Africa, American and West Indies. So for the triangular trade between these three continents, what happened? It provided a network, and that was very important for its growth. For talking about the finance, what did it have? It had its National Bank of England that was founded in 1694. In 1700, there were many banks. You know about that? In the next 10 years, there were around 600 banks all over the England or Britain, not just England but over the Britain. Out of them, more than 100 were in London itself. So bank was very important, crucial for providing money for big industry developments, for setting up the factories and industries. So it was really important to have the banks that provided the financial support. So after reading this much, I guess you have an idea that why Britain was having industrial things, why it was having industrial stuff, mainly because of three reasons. First was that more workers were coming from villages to towns to work. That is why they would work in the factories, in the industries. Secondly, there was a very good financial system, that is, there were banks that were not everywhere in the world during that time. So Britain was quite lucky in that. Then thirdly, we have the river system, a very good navigable system was there. Then later in this chapter, we will discuss two more factors, that are the series of technological development that happened. Then secondly, we will see the railways, the coming up of railways. Now basically in this chapter, you know what, that there were around 26,000 developments, inventions in the 18th century. Out of them, more than half of them were between 1782 to 1800. That is why we will see only 4 developments, 4 inventions or developments, whatever you want to say, in this chapter. Those are, first is that we'll see the steam power. Secondly, the cotton and spinning of the spinning and weaving of cotton. Thirdly, we will see iron steel industries. Fourthly, we will see coal production, like canals, coal things, we will see that. So how coal power was produced, we will see that as well. So you could say that these 4 things we are going to discuss in this chapter more and more in specific ways. So basically, when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, what does it come in your mind? There are many inventions going on in the 18th century, and many people, that many inventors did not even have the basic science knowledge such as physics, chemistry or biology. We will just discuss about those inventors as well who did not have any idea but how did they invent those things. So we will see that as well. Now the next topic of this chapter is coal and iron. So coal and iron. Now let's talk about the transformation of the iron industry, the first development that we'll talk about in this chapter. You know what, that Britain was lucky that it had plenty of iron ore and coal. That was very important for mechanization, for making machineries. Coal, not the coal but the iron, how it was taken out from the iron ore. It was taken out from the iron ore from the process by a process called smelting, in which it was extracted as a liquid metal. Then it would be frozen and shaped whatever you want to make. So in that process, charcoal was heated, that was extracted, that was made out of the burnt timber of the trees. So charcoal was very important in that blast furnace for the smelting process that would provide temperatures, and because of which there would be the furnace having high temperature and the iron would be melted from the iron ore. But this charcoal had some of its own problems. The first one was that it was very hard to transport these charcoal to long distances. They were very fragile in their physical texture. That is why they were very hard to transport to long distance. Secondly, it was very hard to obtain these charcoal as well, because the forests were cleared off, and that is why we only needed timber for it. So forests had been destroyed. How can you get a plenty of forests? Like, you know that even if we destroy the forest, what would happen? It would burn to the charcoal. But what about the next time? There would be no forest in that short time. So of course it was very hard to obtain them as well. Furthermore, it even did not provide that much temperature. Then moreover, what happened then? It was producing iron. It was like extracting iron as a liquid form from the iron ore. But what about the impurities? It had a lot of impurities, due to which iron was not of fine quality. That is why, you know, that there was a family of 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 of Shropshire had transformed this iron industry. The three generations of this family, grandfather, father and son, all by the name of Darbys, had transformed the iron industry. What changes did it make? It started all in 1709 when first Abraham Darby, that is the grandfather of the other last one. So you could say the first Abraham Darby in 1709 made a furnace without using charcoal, in whose place he placed coke that was made out of coal. So that is why that furnace was using coke instead of charcoal, that was even producing finer qualities of iron, casting finer qualities of iron, because coke had less impurities compared to charcoal. This coke was from coal after extracting all that sulfur and impurities. So after that, what is left is coke that would be made. That was the first thing that happened. It was followed by a series of inventions. For example, Henry Court even made puddling furnace and a rolling mill. This was for rolling the bars of metal, that iron, molten iron, into bars through the uses of the steam power. We will see that more and more in the next in the later part of this chapter. But yeah, he did use steam power for making bars out of the melted iron. Then the second Darby invented the wrought furnace, which was less brittle, out of pig iron. So wrought iron that was less brittle was made out of the pig iron. Then in the 1770s, there was this person, John Wilkinson, who did many things. Like, he was the first person to make iron chairs, wax for breweries and distilleries. He even made water pipes out of iron. If we compare iron and wood, as wood was used for a long time for making machineries and the daily use things like furniture, your table, your chair, all were made out of wood. But when iron and wood was compared to wood, iron is far much better. That iron can't be burnt, but wood can be. Wood can be burnt and splintered. That is why iron was preferred more and more, because this metal's properties could be controlled. That is why John Wilkinson in the 1770s, from 1770 to 1779, he made water pipes. He was the first person to make iron chairs as well, vats and many other things. Then the third Darby in 1779, not 1779, but it was 1777, he made a bridge, an iron bridge in Coalbrookdale in the river, spanning the river Severn. That this river Severn was earlier known as that, but now it has grown into a village that is known as Iron Bridge, because this is a place where first iron bridge was made. By whom? It was made by Abraham Darby, the third Darby, that is the son. You could say. So you could say that this family, the three generations of this family, just transformed the whole iron industry. Literally, they transformed. Then the government, the people, the monarchy, you could say, of Britain, what Britain was doing was that it was making profit out of iron industry. You know that it was making such situations that iron industry and coal industry, said coal mines, not industry, but there are mines, coal mines could be concentrated in specific regions as integrated units of iron industry. What it did was that basically it was very lucky to have, or it was very good for them to have that many of their iron industries, coal mines, were just near or just off the shore of, you could say, rivers or the seas. That was very important. That led to more shipbuilding and ship trading as well. So just suppose that if there is a coal mines and we have just grown iron industry near to that, and just few kilometers away there is a river, there is a port. What that would be? That would be very much helpful. That would be very much, like you could say that, very good or crucial thing for them. So that was, like you could say that, not just a win-win situation, but more than that it was. So you could say that Britain was gaining more and more profit of it. What happened that by the 1800s, after 1800s, the production of iron in Britain had quadrupled. In 1820s, 8 tons of you could say that material was needed for producing iron. For 8 tons of coke was needed, but after that it was that 2 tons were only needed. So that was a transformation that occurred in Britain. Then what happened that in the 19th century, the middle and the late 19th century, Britain had such tremendous production of iron that rest of the world put together could not compare to it. So that was how it was going. Now the next topic here we have cotton spinning and weaving. So cotton spinning and weaving. Now let's come on to our next development of this era that we'll see, that we're gonna talk about in this chapter. That is the spinning and weaving of cotton. The British had always used flax and cotton for making cloth. Flax that is used for making linen. So they used like that. But there is one more interesting thing that I would like to tell you that might not be given in your book, but it's a very interesting fact and advanced information that you can have. You know what? The British people had a lot of import of Indian cloth, the raw material as well as Indian cloth. Even though the Indian cloth were sold at greater cost compared to the local material, local clothes of England, still Indian clothes were preferred more and more by the people, because the quality that was provided by these clothes was such inexpressible, was just incomparable. That is why the business of the local workers of England was flopping. So after pressurizing the government, after a long time only did they have Corn Law, according to which the imports from India was banned in England in cotton textiles. So that is why their things flourished, and then many series of inventions were also there that provided many things. So at early period, the cloth from India was imported in Britain that was sold at a great cost. Then after, as the East India Company established political power in India, it began to import the cloth as well as along with raw cotton to be spun into woven cloth in England. Then after, the work of spinning and weaving was very much laborious. 10 spinners were needed to make a yarn to keep one weaver busy. You know that these spinners were mostly women. That is why the term spinster was made. So 10 spinners were needed to make yarn to keep one weaver busy. That is why there was a huge gap between these two people. While spinners had intense laborious activity, that is, they were not free, they did not have free time that much. On the other hand, in contrast, weavers were just sitting idly waiting for yarn to come up so that they could make into fabric. So there was a huge business gap between these two people. It was only after a series of inventions of new machineries that the gap between these two people was lessened, and what became was made shorter. You know that now it could be possible that one spinner was spinning, it was like he or she was making the yarn out of cotton, then it could be spun into fabric and then into clothes. So you could say that this process it was a gradual change, but it did come in Britain. Now let's you know that British cotton industry symbolized British industrialization. It had two features, likewise the other industries. The first one was that import was being done of raw cotton and export was of the woven cloth in India. You know that from India, Britain or British people imported cotton, then exported cotton clothes to India at a very cheap cost. That is why in previous classes you might have seen that, you might have read, like we basically have read that there was so many things going on in Indian market because of this. So that is not the talk of this chapter, so we should not digress. And now you know what, that as these things were going on, it was the first for sustaining the colonization, so that British people would still have power into the Indian market in India, as symbolizing their colonial power. Then secondly, it was mostly dependent on women and children. That is why we will see the ugly face of this thing later in this chapter, in the next part of this chapter maybe. So you could say that these two were the features, likewise in other industries, that symbolize that it was British industrialization. Now let's quickly talk about some of the inventions made during these time and by different people as well. The first one was made by John Kay. It was in 1733. It was known as the flying shuttle loom. It was invented by John Kay in 1733, which could spin, you could say, broader fabrics than before. So if it could spin broader fabrics, then it would be useful, because simultaneously you can make more and more clothes in shorter time. It was the first invention made by this person. Second invention was of the, you could say the spinning jenny. That is very common into the people's mind. The spinning jenny was invented by James Hargreaves in 1765, which could spin more than one yarn at a time. So with one spinner, more than one yarn could be spun in that spinning jenny. Earlier what used to happen, only one circle could be made, only one yarn could be spun, but that was not the case now. The third invention is the water frame. The water frame was invented by Richard Arkwright in 1779. It was like not 1779 but in 1769, and then it was for making, you could say, stronger yarns and fabrics. Also it did provide, what it did provide was that it could be more stronger. In the other hand, it could also make more and more, you could say, cotton yarns and fabrics. So you could say that first one, that it would make more and more like powerful, stronger yarns. Secondly, it was providing more thing, like more than one fabric, more than one yarn could be made there. So that was for two purposes. Then fourth, we have the water frame, and it was invented in 1779. It was for making, you could say, stronger yarns only. Stronger yarns that would be more and more strong and which could spin different types of fabrics. The earlier one that we talked about, this, you could say, that was water, you could say, by Richard Arkwright, that was made, you could say, the water frame. It was basically for, you could say, that cotton purposes as well. Like it could make cloth with cotton, purely with cotton, without adding any other material like linen or some other fabric. So it had the capability of weaving a cloth out of pure cotton. That was the water frame. The fourth one had a nickname, that is mule. It was invented by a person, Samuel Crompton, in 1779. It was just for making, stronger yarns and fabrics. Then all these inventions after such time led to the invention of power loom in 1787 by Edmund Cartwright. Now with this power loom, many new features had been there, like many new features. It could stop automatically after a yarn was, like you could say, broken or maybe torn. It had several new features that were not seen precisely in before years. So these 5 were the quick inventions and very important invention in the spinning and weaving of cotton. Then the next topic that we have here is steam power. So steam power, you know what, that the realization that steam could produce, like steam power could produce tremendous energy, was decisive in large scale industrialization. You know what, in steam power, what do you exactly mean by steam power is the first thing that you need to know. Steam power is very common that we can see in our everyday life as well. As I suppose that there might be a pressure cooker in your house. So that pressure cooker also works on the principle of steam power. You know that when you know that steam power is that steam at high temperature producing energy, that is producing pressure, not energy but producing pressure. Like in pressure cooker, what do we have? We, like when cooking rice, you know, you put rice and water together, then after some time there is a valve through which steam comes out of that cooker. So what happens actually, that rice gets cooked through that pressure. Suppose if there is not any valve, then what would happen? Of course, with your rice and with all that steam, it will just fly in the air. That would happen because pressure would be tremendous. Pressure would be so much that it would just blast open and all the rice is going up. That kind of thing would happen. So now let's talk about steam power in Britain's industrialization. You know what, that hydraulic power from water was being used by the British earlier than that, because hydraulic power, I think all of you understand, because hydraulic power is something like from river or from any water flowing, when you so you could say insert a turbine in it, and through that energy is created. So something like that hydraulic power was being created. Now what happened, that it had its own problem due to seasons, due to flood, or maybe due to drought. It was very much limited. The use of hydraulic power was very much limited in Britain. That is why it was shifting from hydraulic power to steam power. What happened, that Thomas Savery was the first person who wanted to make, who succeeded, not succeeded completely, but he just made a model of, you know, steam engine that was being used in coal mines, because coal was the first necessity of the people, as there was more and more demand of coals and metals. So coal mines were the first place that had the necessity of steam power very much, because they wanted an intensified mining from the deep inside the earth. That is why they wanted steam power, so there could be intensified steam, you could say, mining of coal. So Thomas Savery's model was being used in coal mines, but it was not succeeded. It did not succeed mainly because there was no thing like intensified mining being done by the users of that steam power. That steam engine could not go do the intensified or maybe deep mining in the coal mines. It could only be used in the shallow mines, and that was all could be done earlier than that as well. Then its boiler would blast open, would like burst at high temperatures, at high pressures. So that was a problem with it, and that is why it was kind of failure, or maybe did not succeed. Then after that we have another scientist who tried to make, like, their contributions were also very good. I'm not saying that it was a failure, but in other words you can say that they tried their best, of course. So after that there was a new scientist who was Thomas Newcomen. Earlier than that it was Thomas Savery. So Thomas Newcomen also produced a model of steam engine. It was also used, but it also did not succeed because its power, its pressure was reducing due to condensing cylinder. So he just wanted to make a concept that if we use condensing cylinder for reducing that pressure in that boiler, so because of that condensing, the pressure was also being reduced. So that was the thing going on. It was only in 1769. See, Thomas Newcomen invented this model in 1712. In 1769, finally, this was succeeded by a scientist named James Watt. Now, I think all of you know about him. So you could say that James Watt in 1769 made the first steam engine that succeeded in it. Like, it was just not a mere pump or something like that. It had something like power, you could say power mover, had the capability of even being used in machines. That is why it was like that. And under the great wealthy manufacturer Matthew Bold's son, he also created Soho Foundry at Birmingham. So that was a thing going on. So you could say that it was only in 1769. And you know that there is one more thing that you need to understand, that inventions were not used automatically, was not used just immediately. If you look at the dates carefully, you would see that the invention was made like that, but it was used by people on large scale only after 10 years, 20 years, maybe a decade, maybe 2 decades, 3 decades, or even a century. That was the thing going on. So in other words, it was like that. Now James Watt, many people think that he just made steam engine, but that was not only his contribution. He had made other contributions as well, such as copying the documents chemical reaction for that, and also there is universally used index in mechanical power, that is horsepower. He also described that. So you could say that is all related to steam power. Now this steam power had replaced hydraulic power completely in Britain, as it had more capability. And now in new, you could say, factories coming up, industries coming up, it was being used in coal mining as well as in the industries, factories, in machines it was used. Now the next topic that we have got here is canals and railways. So canals and railways. Now let's talk about these two very much, like the third development that we will see in this chapter, that is the coming up of railways. You know what, that the first canal that was built in Britain was the Worsley Canal by James Brindley, and it had the sole purpose of transporting coal from Worsley region near Manchester. The canals served the purpose of transporting coal according to British people, as coal had was in such a large amount that traveling by road, transporting it by road was very much expensive and very much slower compared to canals. So many canals were just built for transporting coals from their mines or mine deposits to the people, as there was a tremendous, you could say, such a huge demand for coal, because for machine purpose, like for making iron, then secondly for lighting and heating effect in a house. What did they use? They only used coal. So that is why its demand was rising higher and higher. So earlier there was a huge price, like you could say a great price for coal as well, but now as its transportation was becoming easier and easier, its cost fell by half. So that was the purpose of canals. We had some period like the canal mania from 1788 to 1796, in which around 46 new projects of canal making had begun. Even before that, there were 26 projects between the period of 1760 to 1790. You could say between that period was started, except that. So there was a period specifically for that, that is known as canal mania, in which many new projects had begun, because it was really important to have these canals. You know, there is a city that is Birmingham. It only had its growth because of its canals and rivers. You could say different canals and rivers such as Mersey and Humber. That is why, providing such a good thing like transportation mode, it had its growth. It had its known, it is a well-known city of England. So that is why canals were also becoming the reasons for the growth of a city in England. That is why it was important. Now, but by the 1830s, there were problems coming up with canals as well. The first one was congestion of the vessels. You know that it was very much congested for these vessels to go up, like you could say that a lot of materials, a lot of transportation, intense transportation was taking place. Secondly, frost, flood, hail, snow and drought, these phenomena, you could say weather phenomena, were really hard, were making the use of this particular canal projects very much limited. That is why it was not at all preferable by people. The only alternative was the railways. The railways came up. The first railway was in 1825. You know that first railway line that was like railway, you could say traveling, was done in 1825. It was a distance of 9 miles from Stockton to Darlington. For 9 miles, it took 2 hours at the speed of 15 mph. So you could say that was the first journey on the train. Now, the railways were used for transporting goods as well as the people, like we had passengers. So for both purposes, railways were used. It had its dramatic effect, drastic growth in 2 periods. The first was Little Railway Mania from 1833 to 1837, in which around more than 1,000 miles of railways, like you could say that around 3,000 to 4,000 miles of railways were constructed. The bigger railway mania was between 1844 to 1847, in which around 9,500 miles of railway tracks were built. Now there were 2 symbolizations of industrialization in building up of railways. The first one was that the iron track replaced the wooden track that were used in earlier times. Secondly, steam engine was used as a haulage for the trains, for the, you could say, railways, for the trains that were going around. So that was the thing going on. Like the railways did do a lot. It was alternative for the canals as it was cheaper, faster. It could even transport more and more goods as well as passengers, because passengers are important as well. So that was the thing with canals and the railways. The next topic that we have got here is, who were the inventors? So who were the inventors? It is quite interesting to know that many of the inventors of different inventions literally did not have any idea or basic knowledge about that particular field. Many of them even did not know the basic scientific knowledge of chemistry or physics. For example, we have seen that many of them were illiterate as well, but they did prove to be very intelligent people with high IQ levels and very good people, like experimental people. What helped them was that their persistent experiments, calm thinking, that was the main purpose. They also had a very intelligent brain. Of course they had, if they made those inventions. So they were not just logical thinkers, but also persistent experimenters. That is why their inventions proved to be right. For example, we have Richard Arkwright, who was not any person from science background. He was a wig maker and a barber. How does that explain? Of course, he was a good brain. He was a high brain thinker. That was the case. Secondly, we have other people as well. Like for example, the road builder John Metcalfe was a blind. He surveyed all the surfaces, all the road makings, but initially, literally, he was blind. So he had his own mind. Then we have James Brindley, who made the canal, the first canal in Britain, the Worsley Canal. You know what? That he was almost an illiterate. Over all his years of life, he could never spell the word navigation at all. So that explains that he just had very quite precise memory, good thinking, and those kind of imagination, good imagination. So that is why he could make it like that. On the other hand, people such as James Watt, and Thomas Savery, who was an army officer, Thomas Newcomen, who was a goldsmith and a locksmith, did have a little bit knowledge of their fields, and James Watt was literally a science background person, complete scientific bent person. So many of them did have some little knowledge, or even more than that, a very big knowledge of their what they made, but many of them had their logical thinking, did not know even the science background, scientific knowledge, the basic laws of the physics and chemistry. But what they did know is that their needs, their curiosity, their interest, their thinking, all those things combined in one made that, and even a bit of luck was there for those people, of course. So you could say that, you know what, for anything to be made, it is not necessarily that you have to take all the scientific laws, equations and those things. You know what, it was only in 19th century that education, scientific education was provided more and more, far after these technological development. So that just explains that people were still had thirst for knowledge that was being done. You know that people of Britain had such a vast thirst for knowledge, and that's why they made such great inventors. Then after, we also have some societies and some traveling lecturers, you know, that society crosses and lecturers traveling, who did provide some knowledge to those people who wanted to learn, who wanted to gain knowledge. So those were the inventors. Now the next topic here we have is changed lives. So the changed lives. Now, as for what we have discussed, it is crystal clear that people with talent made revolutionary changes in Britain during that time. Now, there were also many big investors, money lenders, who were ready to invest their money in these upcoming revolutionary things, like in these stuffs like inventions, and provided support, financial support to the industries and the inventors, as was in the case of James Watt. Why did it was? The reason was because they wanted to multiply their capital. They thought that they would gain a lot of profit and would multiply their money. Indeed, it happened. All the money would be multiplied. The capital had a lot of profit. The capital was multiplied by many times as due to industrialization. So that did happen. That was a very great, good, very you could say helpful effect for all those big industrialist, capitalist people. Then on the other side, on contrast, we have people, you know, that population of Britain rose dramatically. Around 1750, you could say that in Britain there were only 2 towns or 2 cities that had population over 50,000. Till 1850 it became more than 29, around 29 that became. So it had lot of cities coming up with more and more populations that could not keep pace. You know that all the adequate housing system, sanitation system, food and you could say personal hygiene system, we have water supply system, could not keep pace with this much growing population. Like it literally needed something, like people, if there are more people, they need house to live in. Even if they have money, they can't live there. Why is it like that? Because there is no facility like that. So people were compelled to live in congested slums and in a very poor conditions as well. Poor facilities were there, due to which they caused epidemics, pandemics and many other diseases, and many of them died at a young age as well. On the other hand, we have the rich people. What they did was that they just ran away from there, they escaped and lived in suburbs with kind of fresh air and good water supply. So that was a changed life that was going on. Now the next topic that we have here is the workers. Now the workers, you know what, that it is very you could say regretful to know that the average life of a worker in Britain during that time was very low. It was around 15 in Manchester, it was around 17 in Birmingham, and in some places it was 21. So it was quite regretful to know that. It is feeling like sorry to know that the average life of all those workers were very low, then it must be, you could say that because of their poor working conditions and how long they have been mentally or physically tortured, that is why they had been like this. There were also many reasons, that most of them were young people who you could say adults or maybe teenagers that died at a young age. Then we have half of the children died even before completing their 5 years of age because of many reasons, because of the poor working conditions in the factories in which they worked, or maybe even not having any nutritional food or something like that. So that is why more and more things like that could be seen in Britain. A lot of change in the lives of these people was very common. One of the leading factors was the pollution caused by the industries as well. Like due to water pollution, diseases such as you could say cholera and typhoid were very common. Then in air we had tuberculosis, or what we know as TB as our general language. You know what, in 1832 more than 31,000 workers died of cholera. It was a cholera outbreak. You know that in that time, in that particular area, you could say that if you read name of a person and you think that he died of a disease, then it must be cholera. So you could say that was a thing going on. Many of the people died in the outbreak of cholera. That was a very big thing to happen. Until 1840s, all the you could say municipal authorities did not pay any attention, were negligent towards the duty towards providing any kind of facilities to these people, and you could say seeing their lives. That was a thing going on during that time. So you could say that the workers really had very hardships, really had bad conditions, and literally did not have any good facility over them. Then the next topic we have here is women, children, and the industrialization. So women, children, and industrialization. All the workers who died, who had bad conditions, included women and children as well. Even before industrialization, let's talk about the children first. Children did have to work in their family or in the farm. They were supervised by their parents or relatives, and they had to work a different kind of work they did used to do. Likewise, that was of the rural poor background. Only the children of rural poor background had to do that work. Then we have women from the villages who had to do a lot of intense activities, such as going to farm for our resting purpose, then spinning clothes in our homes, then for water supply, and many things were there. So both of them had to do work, but under the working condition of the factories, such long hours of work under strict discipline system, and very hard punishments, it was really so much on them. You could say that it was unbearable. You could say that women, all those big industrialists, what they wanted was that they wanted to hire more and more women and children workers, because as also you know that as machines were being created, machines were being invented, it was very common sense thing that there would be less use of workers, there will be less need of workers, because machines are coming up, machines are replacing them. That is why they wanted to hire more and more women and children workers who would not be so much agitated because of their working conditions, working hours, and all those poor facilities. Because if they were men, they would be for sure agitated, but they thought that these people would be soft, and that is why this would go on. So that was the main purpose of them. Women were employed in the silk industries, lace making industries, knitting industries, as well as metallurgical industries in Birmingham and in many other parts. Talking about the children, many of the machines were solely made for their purpose. Like the cotton spinning jenny was designed in such a way that it could be used by child workers. That it was specifically made for children workers. In such a way it was designed. Children were needed to go in between those machines, packed machines, as they were small, and their nimble and soft fingers were needed for that spinning jenny. Many of the children had caught their hair or even crushed their hands in those machines, and so like you could say that many of them also died in drop because they dropped into that machines. They fell into that machines from where they died, because after such an exhaustion what they needed was sleep. So because they fell asleep, and that is why they got into those machines and even died at such young age. So that was really so like you could say hard things, or maybe you could say terrified things, horrible things that happened. That was a complete macabre that happened. Then after, you know what, then many children were employed because of their physical features they had, like they were young and their body was also like that. So that is why they were employed on a large scale, and there was no rule even prohibiting that at that time. So that was very common cases. Under a survey in 1842, it was seen that most of the workers had worked, around 50% of the workers who were adults now had been working in that particular industry under the age of 10, and around 28% had been working under the age of 14. So that is definitely child labor, of course. So that those things were very common during that time. Like the women and children literally had such impacts and bad impacts of the industrialization process. Children who needed nutritional food, physical activities for their growth did not have even fresh air. They were just caged off in those industries, in factories. So in other terms, it was like they did not have fresh air or physical exercise or something like that. Even they caused epidemics, like they caught epidemics like cholera and typhoid, and died at a very young age than they were supposed to. For women, it was like that they even lost their unborn child, like whom they even did not give even birth. They died even before that, and even if they were born, they still died because of those living conditions. You know what, many women were working under those conditions in factories because they wanted independence. It proved that they got independence from their families who were forcing them to marry, or many things you could say. But what they had to suffer from was the working condition. Even if they got independence from their families, they were not forced by their families, still they were compelled to live in slummed areas by their factory owners, and still had to work in those conditions, because all those population growing was not simply because more children were born in the families living in those areas, but it was because of immigrants coming there. Like more and more people were coming in those towns and cities in search of work, because there was kind of unemployment in the rural areas. So compared to rural areas, the working condition of the towns and in the factories was really worst. Now the next topic that we have here is protest movements. So protest movements. Now you know what, that the process of industrialization in Britain had coincided with many revolutions going around the world for democratic rights, like the French Revolution. These were generally for the ideas of equality, liberty, and of fraternity that could result in mass movements and actions in Britain for two purposes. First was one that they wanted democratic rights, like right to freedom of expression, press, and liberty, fraternity, and what they demanded, the working population demanded the right to vote. Secondly, charging for all those, that in wars the prices of staple diet such as bread had risen dramatically. So for two purposes. Now first of all, as soon as the industrialization started, what the working population demanded was rights. Firstly, they demanded the right to vote, but definitely it was not given by the government of England. Instead, they introduced new laws, two laws you could say, that was a combination acts, in which first thing was that it was illegal for people to incite or for contempt or hatred, to write anything or to speak anything against the king, government, or the constitution. Secondly, it was made illegal for public meetings to happen for more than 50 people that were unauthorized. So that was something like this. Now still protests continued, and under the term that they were against the old corruption. Old corruption was used for the privileges given to all those landowners, nobles, and we have the constitution and all those people, you could say MPs, member of parliament. Then again, these happened in many of the areas, not just in one city or two cities, but all over the England for different purposes. Like in Yorkshire, what they did was that they were shearing frames that were introduced. So by shearing, you could say croppers, these shearing frames were crushed, you could say crushed and destroyed completely, because these were people who sheared sheep with their own hands. Then again, many new many new machines such as threshing machine was also introduced, that possessed as a threat to the other farmers, you could say that for traditional farmers. So they just destroyed it. 9 of them were hanged and 450 were sent to Australia as convicts, as we'll see in theme 10 as well. Apart from that, in other areas such as Derbyshire, and we have many other areas where these protests also occurred. You know what, that in the starting days when these protests occurred, it was just for one purpose or two purposes, because England had been in a war with France from 1792 to 1815. 1815, all of you know that war at Waterloo happened, in which Napoleon was defeated, and then Treaty of Vienna also happened. So till 1815, from 1792, these kind of wars had happened. So what happened was that the prices of bread rose dramatically. That was unaffordable. That was more than the average wages of the workers. So what workers did was that it was very common to see bread or food riots in England during that time, after 1792. After riots, when people took over all the bread, they would sell it in the markets to other people at a very affordable price, and indeed a very good right price for the commodity, because all those merchants were profit makers. They just wanted to gain profit. They just saw the opportunity of the war and were making the profit. But these people sold those items at affordable prices, and not just affordable but the right prices also. You know what, that these kind of acts were frequently seen in the 1795, the worst year of the war for the Britain, because the trade between Europe and England was disrupted because of all of these war going, due to which factories shut down, unemployment grew. Then what happened, you could say more and more people were coming around in search of food, in search of riots could be seen, and many other things were going on simultaneously as well. And now you know that what happened, that even though it was most frequent in 1795, it continued till 1815 until the war ended. Still the government did not provide any kind of laws, or you could say any kind of rules for the right to vote, because the member of parliaments, all of the member of parliaments, nobles, and all of the upper class people like professionals were opposed to the idea of giving the right to vote to the working professionals, and that is why they could not have. In 1819, around 50,000 people had a kind of meeting for democratic rights, and what you could say that it was at St. Peter's. So there they had meeting, but they were brutally repressed and suppressed, you could say, by the government. It was known as the Peterloo Massacre. So you could say that under this Peterloo Massacre, many people were killed. Now you know that there is an interesting story, anecdote behind this Peterloo term as well. It was named because it wanted to rhyme a word, that is Waterloo. Waterloo war, as all of you know, that ended in 1815. So just opposite a rhyme, you could say, was Peterloo. It was named just like that. And then we also have a concept of 𝓒𝓲𝓫. So 𝓒𝓲𝓫 kind of ideology was started by great general Ned Ludd, who like this kind of ideology was just completely kind of different from that assault, you could say that assault breaking machines or something like that. What they wanted, what demanded from the government was that there were many things. First was that they wanted the right to vote. Secondly, the right to make trade unions. Thirdly, that is permanent wages or the fixed wages should be there, even if you're using machines, or maybe like even if the working conditions are bad and you're not providing something, but there should be fixed wages for those workers who are doing work. Then after furthermore he just wanted that all those workers who had been unemployed because they lost their jobs because of these new coming machines must be provided with some kind of work. So that was his demand, but that was completely denied by the government. Then again 6 acts were passed that all these things were just denied. But you know that after Peterloo massacre, after some years, it did gain, like you could say, some little bit gains were also there, like the need to give more representation to the House of Commons. You know that in British Parliament we have House of Commons as well. So for those House of Commons, the need was seen for the more representation. Secondly, in 1824 or in 1824-25, what happened that the 2 Combination Acts were repealed. So that was a thing like protest movement that went on in England. Now the next topic that we have here is reforms through laws. So now let's talk about reforms through laws. Now, do you really think that there was any attention given to the children as we have been discussing so far? Have you seen anything like that? Right, you could say that there was really a need to give attention to all those children, because at such a young age they were losing their lives, their playful childhood or something like that. So you could say that what they needed was attention, given protection by the government. It was given as well, but after a long struggle, you could say. So in starting year 1814, what happened that a law was passed that children under 9 could not work in any of the factories, and above that had to work in limited hours. But of course it was not followed. There was no one to supervise it as well, and this was going on. So it did not have enforcement. Even though the law was passed, act was passed, there was no enforcement for any from any government body or anything like that. Then again, after a long protest going on by the people in North England and many other parts of the England, what happened that in 1833 again a law was passed according to which children under 9 could only be hired in the silk factories, and the older children had a work limit of 12 hours, and that goes for women as well. Like women also had to work in limited hours, that is 12 hours, and good working conditions should be there, for which inspectors were also hired. You could say factory inspectors were also hired. Finally in 1847, you could say after 30 years of agitation, more laws were passed and effective laws were passed for children, that is they could not work, you could say children under the 18 had to work in these conditions, could not work, and above that had to work like this. So in 1847 they got complete effective laws, you could say. Then that was a case of textile industries, so on. But what about the coal mines? You know that children had acted as coal bearers and coal trappers in coal mines. Like they would be small, so what they had to do was that they would be shutting and opening the doors of the coal wagons, and many other things they had to do, like the underground they had to go, because that was a narrow lane, so where adults could not go. So they sent us children, small kids, standing there, and you could say that for working purpose and many other purposes. So that was literally bad. They also had to carry a lot of coal on their backs. So that is why we needed some laws for coal production as well, in coal mines as well. Then what happened that, you know, according to surveys conducted in 1842, it was seen that, not survey but it was a commission, government commission, in 1842 it was seen that the working condition of the 1833 of all the kids and children in the coal mines had worsened, because now all the children were being shifted from textile industry to coal mines. Then again, after you could say that Coal and you could say Collieries Act, again laws were passed that children could not work in the coal mines before this age or after this age, but this was not enforced because it was really difficult to do so. Factory inspectors were paid less and were often bribed by the factory owners and by the coal mine owners. Then next agenda, you could say that next aspect was that parents lied about the ages of their children as well. So what they would do is that if the child is of 18, you could say 5 years or maybe 7 years or of 8 years, he would say that he is above 12 or 14. So that was the thing going on, because their incomes were meager, and that is why they wanted more and more income. So for that purpose, children were sent to work, and that was really bad thing to do so. Then that age for the child to grow up, to have a playful childhood, to study, to gain more knowledge, and to you could say that quench off his curiosity and thirst for knowledge, but he had to do work, only work and work. That was really a bad thing to happen. Now the next and last thing of this chapter is the debate on the Industrial Revolution. So the debate on the Industrial Revolution. Now, as far we have been discussing in this chapter that there was an Industrial Revolution going on in Britain, but was it really like that? You know that till 1970s, historians had used this term Industrial Revolution many a time in the you could say historical texts, context, books, commentaries, and many other things. But it was only after that period that it began into debate, argument, and it began to be questioned by many other historians. It was suggested that the dates that we have read about in this whole chapter from 1760 to 1820s was not the actual date of industrialization in Britain. The process of Industrial Revolution, you could say industrialization, was rather after these dates rather than before these dates. It was actually after these dates, because if the machines were being you could say established in you could say factories, industries, and many upcoming industries as well, but was it really being welcomed by the people? Were these industries preferred by the native citizens, native people, local people? Still, you know what, that when people went there, half of the population was still in the working unit, working a factory, not just in factories, but they're in hometowns, in rural areas. It was only in the late 19th century and in the 20th century that the uses of these new technologies began to be more and more, began to be increased. But before that, only these were introduced. They were not on a massive, large scale. Then there is also another suggestion that Britain had been thrown into the wars from 1760 to 1792. It had been like completely intensified wars. So all the investment that it got in the you could say form of money and wealth, it was not used in development, but rather it was used in wars against France, against American independence movement as well. As we have seen that against France, it has been long-term enemy during that time. Then you could say that there were three things going simultaneously in Britain. First one was the wars going on for a long time. Second was the maintaining colonial power in India as well. The third one was that developments in the country. So of course one of them would have failed, and that resulted in all this chaos going on in Britain. Then we have done Britain. Did it really have its own like you could say its own production? No, it had imported a lot of items as well. Like all the raw materials were imported. It was exported, like for all the cotton textile, it imported cotton from India and many other West Indies countries, African countries, and many other regions. It just exported its woven clothes, spun clothes. And it was also because of you could say resumption from the war of North America War of Independence. You could say that American War of Independence, because of the resumption, it just like you could say sustained that much. Then we have to see that it was only after 1900s that we can see that Britain, yes, there is like more people are coming, more working populations are living in the town areas and city areas. You know what, that after 1850s you could say that only 20% of the working population was living in the rural areas of Britain. All of them were congested in these towns. And then what's more is that it was not distributional, it was not equilateral, or you could say distribution of all those developments in the country. There was nothing like that, because you know what, all the developments of upcoming factories, industries were just in some areas, particular specific areas of Britain, such as Manchester, Birmingham, and we have Yorkshire and some regions of Britain, like of course London. But not all the regions of England and Britain were under this phase of industrialization. So that itself suggests that of course it was not an industrial revolution according to these suggestions and you could say statements. Then we have that some people also believe that industrial revolution is very much limited term. Industrial with revolution is very much limited term. First of all, it was definitely not a revolution, but because it was more a gradual process than it was supposed to be. Then industrial revolution just means that economic growth of that country, increased productivity of that country, more uses of new and new technologies, techniques and machines. Then we have more and more factories and industries coming up. But was it really like that? No, nothing like that, because during that time it had more than that these things. There were social things going on as well. And secondly was that wars, you could say protests for democratic rights were also being going on due to the, you could say, impact of French Revolution and many other things. So it was a mere term, it is a very mere term to describe industrial revolution, because it just did not have economic growth. At the same time, it just had more and more social changes as well that were seemed to be there. Today, see in England, what is the condition? Of course, it has been like because of the historical paths that it chose. So of course, because of that, it all is happening right now. So you could say that is why there are a lot of debates. If you go into the debates and arguments of the industrial revolution, then you can find bulk of the statement. But just try to understand what these mean and what is the basic conclusion of all these statements. Then you can only find one thing, that is, we are just debating around it. It's not possible to say anything, we could say, without any proper logic or facts. So that is all we have covered in this chapter. Now basically this chapter was completely focused, intensified on the industrial revolution, how that occurred, why in Britain, the reasons behind it, the side effect, the negative effects as well, like the engineering effects on all those people that were working there, and also the economic growth of Britain. You know that by the economist Arnold Toynbee, he did say that he was an economist, and economic grew a lot in Britain during that time. So you could say that in short terms we discussed everything about industrial revolution. Now in the next chapter we will see that how natives were exploited by the colonial powers, that is how indigenous people were being tortured, exploited, you could say exploited and spoiled by the colonial power, in which we will see different examples. So that is all for this video. I've covered all the topics and subtopics, and the next remaining themes of this chapter or this book will be covered in the further upcoming videos. So stay tuned for the upcoming videos. Thank you very much.